What happens when one of Hollywood's most beloved and humble actors gets pushed to his absolute breaking point on live television? What we witnessed on the Drew Barrymore show was nothing short of explosive, and by the end of this video, you'll understand exactly why Keanu Reeves walked off that stage and why he might never return to daytime television again. Make sure to subscribe and drop a comment below, because this story gets more intense with every passing minute. It started like any other Tuesday morning taping. The studio audience was buzzing with excitement. The cameras were rolling, and Drew Barrymore had that signature enthusiasm radiating from her talk show host chair. But what nobody in that audience expected was to witness one of the most uncomfortable celebrity interviews in recent memory. One that would leave Keanu Reeves questioning everything about the entertainment industry. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the one and only Keanu Reeves, Drew announced with her usual bubbly energy, her hands clapping rapidly as the audience erupted in applause. Keanu walked out wearing his characteristic black suit, that familiar humble smile crossing his face as he waved to the crowd. He settled into the guest chair, adjusting his jacket slightly, completely unaware of what was about to unfold. "Keanu, it's so wonderful to have you here," Drew began, leaning forward with an intensity that seemed just a little too eager. "I have to say, I've been dying to ask you some questions that I think our audience is really curious about. Thank you for having me, Drew." "I'm happy to be here," Keanu replied, his voice carrying that calm, measured tone that fans have come to love. There was something genuine about the way he spoke. No pretense, no Hollywood artifice. "So let's dive right in," Drew continued, her smile widening in a way that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I've been reading about your personal life, and I have to ask, don't you think it's kind of strange that someone your age is still single? I mean, most successful men your age have settled down by now." The question hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Keanu's expression shifted slightly, the warmth in his eyes dimming just a fraction. "Well, I think everyone's journey is different, Drew. I don't really see my relationship status as something that defines my worth or my success." "But come on," Drew pressed, her voice taking on a sharper edge disguised as playful banter. "You're Keanu Reeves. You could have anyone you want. Are you holding out for someone impossibly perfect? Or are there maybe some issues we don't know about?" The audience shifted uncomfortably in their seats. This wasn't the light-hearted celebrity chat they had expected. Keanu's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but his voice remained steady. "I think that's a pretty personal question, and I'm not sure it's really relevant to why I'm here today. I thought we were going to talk about my upcoming film." "Oh, we'll get to that," Drew waved dismissively, clearly enjoying the discomfort she was creating. "But our viewers want to know the real Keanu. They want to understand why someone who seems so perfect on the surface can't maintain a long-term relationship. Is it commitment issues? Are you afraid of intimacy?" "Drew, I really don't think this is appropriate," Keanu said, his voice still calm but with a firmness that anyone paying attention would have recognized as a warning. "My personal relationships aren't entertainment for your audience. Everything is entertainment, Keanu," Drew shot back, her mask of cheerful hostess slipping for just a moment. "That's the business we're in. You came on my show, so you signed up for this conversation. Actually, I came on your show to promote a film that I'm passionate about, to talk about the craft of acting, and to connect with people who appreciate cinema," Keanu responded, his composure remarkable given the circumstances. "I didn't sign up to have my personal life dissected for ratings." The tension in the studio was becoming palpable. Audience members were exchanging glances, and even the camera operators seemed to be focusing more intently, sensing that something significant was happening. Drew, however, seemed energized by the conflict she had created. "Look, I get it," she continued with false sympathy. "It must be hard being the sad, lonely guy in Hollywood, the tragic figure who lost his girlfriend and his child and never recovered. I mean, that's the narrative everyone talks about, right?" The words hit Keanu like physical blows. His face went completely still, and for a moment, the only sound in the studio was the hum of the cameras and the uncomfortable shifting of the audience. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet but carried a weight that made everyone in the room pay attention. "That's enough," he said simply. "What do you mean that's enough?" Drew laughed, but there was something forced about it now. "We're just having a conversation here. This is what talk shows are for." "No, Drew, this is what bad talk shows are for," Keanu replied, his composure still intact but his words carrying an edge that cut through the studio air. "Good talk shows are about connecting with people, sharing stories that matter, and treating guests with basic human dignity." "Oh, please," Drew scoffed, her pretense of friendliness completely abandoned now. "Don't lecture me about dignity when you've spent your entire career playing the same brooding character over and over again. At least I'm trying to show people who you really are." "You have no idea who I really am," Keanu said, standing up from his chair slowly. The movement was deliberate, controlled, but there was something about it that made the entire studio hold its breath. "And frankly, after this conversation, I'm not sure you have any idea who you really are either." The audience was dead silent now, watching this surreal moment unfold. Drew's face flushed red, whether from embarrassment or anger. It was impossible to tell. "Excuse me?" she said, her voice rising slightly. "I know exactly who I am. I'm someone who asks the questions that matter, who doesn't let celebrities hide behind their publicists and their carefully crafted images. You're someone who thinks that cruelty disguised as curiosity is journalism," Keanu replied, his voice still remarkably steady. "You're someone who mistakes invasion of privacy for authenticity." The words landed with devastating precision. Drew's mouth opened and closed, like she was trying to find a comeback, but nothing came out. The silence stretched on, becoming more uncomfortable with each passing second. The uncomfortable silence that followed Keanu's words seemed to stretch forever, but it was Drew who finally broke it, her voice now carrying a defensive edge that everyone in the studio could hear. "You know what, Keanu? I think you're being incredibly unfair right now," she said, crossing her arms and leaning back in her chair. "I'm trying to have a real conversation with you, not some sanitized publicity interview that everyone else does. A real conversation involves mutual respect," Keanu replied, still standing, but not making any move to leave. "It involves actually listening to what the other person is saying, instead of just waiting for your next opportunity to attack." "Attack?" Drew's voice pitched higher, and she let out a forced laugh. "I'm asking legitimate questions that millions of people want answers to. You're a public figure, Keanu. This comes with the territory. Being a public figure doesn't mean surrendering your humanity," Keanu said, his voice carrying a sadness that made several audience members shift uncomfortably. "It doesn't mean that every painful moment of your life becomes fodder for someone else's entertainment." Drew's expression hardened. "Oh. So now I'm supposed to feel sorry for you? The millionaire movie star who gets paid ridiculous amounts of money to pretend to be other people? Please. This isn't about money, Drew. It's about basic decency," Keanu responded, his patience clearly wearing thin despite his outward composure. "Something you seem to have forgotten in your quest for viral moments." "Viral moments?" Drew stood up abruptly, her chair rolling backward. "Is that what you think this is about? You think I'm some kind of social media hungry host? Looking for clicks? I think you're someone who has lost sight of what conversation actually means," Keanu said quietly. "I think you've confused interrogation with interview, humiliation with honesty." The audience was completely captivated now, watching this verbal sparring match unfold. Some were recording on their phones despite the no recording policy, sensing they were witnessing something unprecedented. "You want honesty?" Drew's voice rose again, her professional facade cracking completely. "Here's some honesty for you. You come on these shows with your mysterious, humble act, pretending to be this perfect gentleman, but everyone knows you're just a damaged guy who can't move on from his past." The cruelty in her words was breathtaking. Several audience members gasped audibly, and one person actually stood up as if they were going to intervene. Keanu's face went completely pale, but when he spoke, his voice was steady as steel. "And you think that pain is something to be exploited for entertainment," he said. "You think that someone else's grief is a toy for you to play with on television. I think that if you can't handle the heat, you shouldn't have gotten into this business." Drew shot back, her voice now openly hostile. "Everyone has problems, Keanu. Everyone deals with loss. The difference is that most people don't get to hide behind this saint-like image while cashing million-dollar checks." "You're right about one thing," Keanu said, nodding slowly. "Everyone deals with loss. But not everyone turns that understanding into a weapon to hurt other people. Not everyone thinks that suffering is a weakness to be mocked." Drew's face flushed red again. "I'm not mocking anything. I'm trying to have an adult conversation about real life, something you apparently can't handle." "An adult conversation would involve empathy," Keanu replied. "It would involve recognizing that the person sitting across from you is a human being, not just content for your show." "Don't lecture me about empathy," Drew snapped. "You don't know anything about my life, about what I've been through, about the struggles I've had to overcome to get where I am." "You're absolutely right," Keanu said, his voice softening slightly. "I don't know your story, and I wouldn't presume to use your pain for my entertainment. I wouldn't dig into your personal tragedies and wave them around on television like trophies." The words hit their mark. Drew's mouth tightened, and for a moment, something vulnerable flickered across her face before the hostility returned. "That's different," she said weakly. "How is it different?" Keanu asked. "Because you're the one asking the questions? Because you're the one holding the microphone? That doesn't make your pain any less real, and it doesn't make mine any less deserving of respect." "Stop trying to turn this around on me," Drew said, her voice rising to almost a shout. "You came on my show. You agreed to be here. If you can't handle a few tough questions, maybe you should stick to action movies where you don't have to think too hard." The insult was petty and desperate, and everyone in the studio could feel it. Keanu stood there for a moment, looking at Drew with something that might have been pity. "You know what's really sad about this whole situation?" he said finally. "It's that somewhere underneath all this anger and desperation to create drama, there's probably a decent person who just forgot how to connect with people without hurting them first." Drew's eyes flashed with rage. "Don't you dare psychoanalyze me. Don't you dare stand there and pretend you're better than me." "I'm not pretending anything," Keanu said. "I'm just sad that this is what television has become. I'm sad that kindness is seen as weakness, and that cruelty is mistaken for strength." "Oh, spare me the philosophical nonsense," Drew said dismissively. "This is the real world, Keanu. This is how things actually work. If you can't handle reality, maybe you should go back to your fantasy movie sets. The reality is that there are still people in this world who believe in treating each other with dignity," Keanu replied. "The reality is that some of us still think conversation should be about understanding, not conquest." "Understanding doesn't get ratings," Drew said bluntly, and the honesty of the statement seemed to surprise even her. "And there it is," Keanu said quietly. "That's the truth you've been dancing around this whole time. None of this is about understanding me or giving your audience insight into who I am. It's about creating a spectacle at my expense." The admission hung in the air between them like a confession. Drew's admission about ratings hung in the studio air like toxic smoke, and for a moment, she seemed to realize what she had just revealed. Her face went through a series of expressions, from shock at her own words to anger at being cornered into honesty. "That's not what I meant," she said quickly, trying to backtrack. "I meant that people want authentic conversations, real moments, not the fake stuff that most celebrities try to sell." "No," Keanu said firmly, and there was something in his tone that made everyone in the studio pay attention. You meant exactly what you said. You just admitted that exploiting people's pain for ratings is more important to you than treating them like human beings. Drew's composure was completely shattered now. You're twisting my words. You're making me sound like some kind of monster when all I'm trying to do is my job. Your job is to interview people, not to traumatize them, Keanu replied. Your job is to facilitate conversation, not to create cruelty for content. Stop acting like I'm torturing you, Drew said, her voice becoming shrill. These are just questions. If you can't handle a few personal questions, maybe you're not as mentally stable as everyone thinks you are. The cruelty of the statement was breathtaking. Several audience members gasped, and one woman actually stood up and started walking toward the exit. The suggestion that asking invasive questions about someone's deepest traumas was somehow a test of their mental stability was so fundamentally wrong that it seemed to break something in the room. Keanu stood perfectly still for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was quieter than it had been all day. But it carried more weight than anything else he had said. There it is, he said. The real Drew Barrymore. Someone who thinks that questioning a person's mental stability is an appropriate response to being called out for cruel behavior. I didn't mean it like that, Drew said quickly, but her voice lacked conviction. Yes, you did, Keanu said simply. And you know what the really tragic part is? You probably don't even realize how far you've fallen from who you used to be. There was a time when Drew Barrymore stood for resilience, for overcoming adversity, for showing kindness to people who were struggling. Drew's face crumpled slightly. And for a moment, the mask slipped completely. Don't you dare talk about my past. Don't you dare use my history against me. I'm not using anything against you, Keanu said gently. I'm trying to remind you of who you once were, before you decided that other people's pain was something to be mined for television gold. You don't know anything about who I am, Drew said, but her voice was weaker now, defensive rather than aggressive. I know enough to be disappointed, Keanu said, and the sadness in his voice was genuine. I know enough to recognize that somewhere along the way, you stopped seeing guests as people and started seeing them as content. The studio was dead silent except for the hum of cameras that were still rolling, capturing every word of this unprecedented breakdown of the traditional talk show format. You want to know who I really am? Drew said, her voice rising again as she tried to regain control. I'm someone who has worked incredibly hard to build a career, to create something meaningful, to connect with people. And I'm not going to let some self-righteous movie star come on my show and lecture me about how to do my job. I'm not lecturing you about your job, Keanu said. I'm questioning whether you remember what your job actually is. Because right now, it seems like your job is to hurt people for entertainment. My job is to ask the questions that matter, Drew shot back. No, Keanu said firmly. Your job is to create a space where people feel safe enough to share what they want to share. Your job is to facilitate genuine connection, not to force people to relive their worst moments for your audience's amusement. Drew was visibly struggling now, caught between doubling down on her aggressive approach and recognizing the truth in what Keanu was saying. People want honesty. They want real conversations. People want authenticity, not exploitation, Keanu corrected. There's a difference between someone choosing to share their story and someone being cornered into revealing their pain. I never cornered anyone, Drew said, but her voice lacked conviction. You cornered me from the moment I sat down, Keanu said quietly. You decided before this interview even started that my personal trauma was going to be your entertainment for the day. Quote. The accusation hung in the air, and Drew's face went through a series of expressions as she processed the truth of it. I was just trying to have a meaningful conversation, she said weakly. No. You were trying to create a viral moment at my expense, Keanu said. And the really sad part is that you probably convinced yourself that exploitation was the same thing as journalism. Drew's mouth opened and closed several times before she found her voice again. "Get off my stage," she said suddenly, her voice sharp with anger and humiliation. "I was already leaving," Keanu said simply, and there was no anger in his voice, just a profound sadness. "I just wanted you to understand what you had become, before I did." He turned to walk away, then paused and looked back at Drew, who was standing behind her desk looking smaller than she had at the beginning of the show. "I hope you find your way back to who you used to be," he said quietly, "because that person was worth knowing." With that, Keanu Reeves walked off the stage, leaving behind a studio full of stunned audience members and a host who had just been given the most devastating performance review of her career. The cameras kept rolling as Drew stood there, visibly shaken, trying to process what had just happened. "We'll be right back," she said weakly to the cameras, but everyone knew that nothing would be the same after the break. What we witnessed that day wasn't just a celebrity walking off a talk show. It was a masterclass in maintaining dignity under pressure, in speaking truth to power, and in refusing to let cruelty masquerade as entertainment. Keanu Reeves showed us all what it looks like when someone refuses to participate in their own humiliation, and in doing so, he revealed something fundamental about the current state of celebrity culture and daytime television. Make sure to subscribe for more incredible stories like this one. And let me know in the comments what you think about celebrities who refuse to play along with invasive interview tactics.